When I got into MMA, um, I really got into it as a fan. Here was the thing in my house. There was only a few things that you could not do, right? I mean, there was no drugs and drinking, there was no sneaking out after hours, and there was no skipping school. I mean, these were like the big ones. And the drugs and drinking really wasn't a thing, not only with me, but even in my sphere. Sneaking out was never an issue because my parents always said, you can be out as late as you want. You just have to tell us, right? If you tell us you're going to be home at midnight, you got to be home at midnight. But if something happens, call. Okay. But again, I didn't really have these late night friends. That was a real easy one. And then skipping school wasn't a hard one either, except one day. And the UFC had come out and the internet didn't exist back then. This is 1993. So for you, I mean, literally that word internet wasn't even a word. So the relevance being you could keep a secret. You could hold the UFC somewhere and you could release it on a VHS tape to a rental store 60 days later. And my friends and I'd all go rent it, and we'd never seen it. We'd never heard the results. Twitter wasn't a thing. Facebook wasn't. I mean, there's just these social media. You could keep a secret. So my buddy Jeff Williams had gone down and rented the UFC. And for me to see it, I had to skip class and go watch it. So I never skipped class for as a junior in high school. Boom, I skipped class, went to his house, we watched it. I went home. I immediately told my father, skip seventh period today. You did, huh? Why'd you do that? So I told him. I said, it was worth it. Whatever punishment's coming, but I figured out today what I want to do with my life. And that was my first foray into MMA. So then when I began to practice it, it was all about my ideas versus everybody else's ideas. What I mean is, what is the best way to train? There was no mixed martial arts gyms back then. You would never meet a coach anywhere that would proclaim he was a mixed martial arts coach. Never. It didn't work that way. You might wrestle over here, which I did, and then decide that boxing was the most helpful thing. So you go box over across town once or twice a week. And then if you could find somebody that knew jujitsu, maybe you could get a workout with him every now and again. Then if you could get a fight lined up, which was the hardest part of this whole puzzle, you try to put it all together. And as disorganized and as unprofessional of a training environment leading into a competitive environment as that may sound, it was level because your opponent was doing the same thing. There was just no better system in place. So I was at Eugene, 1997, and I was wrestling, University of Oregon, and there was a kickboxing gym in town. Mike Walrath was the coach, and twice a week, he would run kickboxing practice. So I would go right from college wrestling practice, jump in my truck, boom, run over there, kickbox for an hour. So now I've made fight friends, right? And there ended up being a fight that was coming up in Vancouver, Washington. It was put on by Maurice Smith and Matt Hume. They had teamed up. And Maurice, as I understood it, was kind of the promoter, but I know Matt was involved. Matt was even the referee of the match. And, at that time, you would do whatever you could just to be in the room with these guys, let alone on a card led by these guys. So, okay, Mike brings us all in, kickboxing coach, brings us all in after practices. There's some fights coming up. It's called pancration, which means mixed martial arts. It's called pancration. Who wants to do it? And everybody raises their hand. And so Mike goes, okay, what do you weigh? And he started going around the room asking them what they weighed. And there was no commissions back then. And there wasn't even going to be a weigh-in. It was just coaches with their word and another coach with his word. And you go meet up under the tent and you have this fight. So we go around the room and everybody that was in that gym was grossly lying about how much they weighed. I was standing next to a guy that was 200 pounds. I knew this guy inside and I worked out with him every single day. He says 160. Mike says, what do you weigh? He says 160 pounds. And I remember the lack of honor in it. I was disgusted with the lack of honor in trying to fight a guy that you outweigh by 40 pounds because you know there's no way. I was just disgusted. And I weighed about 188 pounds myself. So it finally came to me, and it came to me last. And I was the new guy. I'd only been there about 40 days, maybe 2 months. These guys had been there for like 6 and 7 years. Comes to me last, 188 pounds. And I told the coach, I said, 225. And everybody turns their head and whips their head around at me. And they go, you don't weigh that much. And their big argument to how a 200-pounder would weigh 160. So, no, I'm going to get on a diet. That's what I'll weigh. That's what I'll weigh when I get to the fight. So I just kept a straight face. And I said, yeah, but I'm working on gaining weight. I'll be 225 by the fight. And again, everybody, oh my God, he's what a sucker. He doesn't know what he's doing. But this was my own macho bravado way of trying to set an example for these guys that we don't put our name, put our own coach's name, put our gym's name, and then go lie and show up to, take advantage of some guy 40 pounds less. So this is the way I do it. And I never fix it. I never tell Mike that. Now, I had no ability to gain weight back then. I mean, I was a Division I athlete. So every morning at 6:30 in the morning, we had a run and a lift. Every afternoon at 3:30, we wrestled hard for 2 hours. I mean, there was no ability to gain weight when you're working that hard every single day. Plus, then I'm moonlighting and going over across town to kickbox because I got this fantasy of being a fighter someday. At any rate, the fight finally comes around, and I got to drive up past my house. College was about 2 hours away. From my house, it was only about another 30 minutes. So I drive home. I tell my parents, hey, got to fight, got to get up to the such and such. Fort Vancouver, it was called. And so my dad didn't understand. I don't think I told him it was a fight. I think I said it was pancreation. I am doing this pancreation thing. There's pancreation tonight. And my dad, who never missed an athletic competition I had, never. I'd wrestled in Germany at that point. I'd wrestled in Tokyo at that point. My dad got on airplanes and went. He came to every single practice I had. He stayed at home. It's pancreation. He just blew it off. I still remember the hand he made, like when he told my mom and I. So my mom and I leave. And we go out there and we find out we're early, so we don't know what to do. It's too far to go back home. We got to go kill some time. So we end up going to this restaurant called the Texas Roadhouse, which, by the way, is fantastic. I order something. I can't remember what it's called, but it was a huge plate of mashed potatoes covered in hamburger gravy. The worst thing you would ever want to eat right before you went into a fist fight. But I'm also kind of like my dad. I don't fully know what I'm getting into, right? I got a bunch of tough friends. It looks like a tough sport. Walk in the park. Well, even if this guy's 225. Okay. So we get to the actual event, and it's moving right along, and it was a combination of boxing and kickboxing. Pretty damn good crowd. And finally, I get in there to go, and we did nothing on our hands at all. No wraps, no gloves, and we had to wear shin pads. Now, Matt Hume, who was the referee, told us, open hand only. And by the way, don't try to knock a guy out by going straight. It must come in a looping fashion. Well, everybody that I had seen go before me was given those same instructions by Matt Hume. So was nobody followed this rule except for me. I was really into the slaps and the open hands and not trying to knock somebody out with a palm thrust. And everybody, whatever happened, like nobody really got called on it. So it's a 7-minute fight. And so we fought for 7 minutes, and I was pretty dominant in it. Ben Haley is who I took on. I was pretty dominant in getting position, maintaining it, and going home. But I must tell you, those 7 minutes from an athletic standpoint, and I was a college wrestler, relevance being, those were 7-minute matches. It was 3-minute round, 2-minute round, 2-minute round, 7 minutes. I was used to 7 minutes. This was some of the longest 7 minutes I know anything about. I was so tired and so exhausted. And I went for the finish right off the bat. And I don't know anything about going for the finish other than what I'd seen guys do on TV. So when I got on top, I'm grounding, pounding, I'm slapping the body, I'm slapping the head. That's not a weapon. A slap isn't a weapon. That's how little I knew back then. I didn't know that wasn't a weapon. I thought you could finish a fight with a slap. You could just slap a guy into submission. So I was so exhausted, I win the fight. And you get a trophy, and Matt Hume raises your hand. This was a big deal. And when I'm done, we're walking out. I can't even make it to the car. It's just my mom and I. As we're walking, I can't even make it to a car. Remember, there was a table right by the exit. And I stopped my mom and I laid down on the table. And my mom had to go get a bucket, right? Sorry to be gross, but the mashed potatoes and the gravy and the whole bit, that's coming back up. It's a whole mess. And this guy, Ben, walks right past me. And he looks over at me. He's in defeat. I have defeated him. I am the victor. He looks over at me on the table. And I remember the way he turned his head, it was like he grew 2 inches. Like, yeah, you tell me who the winner is. I'm headed home. You can't even get to the parking lot. And I remember seeing him. I remember what he was thinking with that little look he gave me. And I just remember raising my hand and acknowledging him and thinking, next time, first off, I need to not have that meal. And second off, you got to slow it a little bit. You can't just come out on a great big sprint and think you're going to finish a guy in 30 seconds if there's a potential of 7 minutes. It was a big lesson learned. It was a terrible experience, though I value it greatly. Oh, I forgot. I actually forgot the whole point of me telling this. So Where this all comes back around is when we get home, my mother has videotaped the whole thing. And you guys might remember those handheld camcorders, a big VHS goes inside and you close it and you push play right at these great big things. And so she filmed the whole thing. So when we get home, we show my dad. And when I came through the door, my dad, the heck's going on here? So we had it on tape. We put it in. My dad was so upset. He didn't know what pancreas meant. He had no ability to know when I said I'm going to this pancreation event that meant we were going to get in a fight. He had all of his friends over. I mean, there wasn't anybody that in his orbit that hadn't seen that fight. He had all of his friends over for a part that I don't even know about. My mom tells me later he's got wine and he's got the pizza and he's got all his friends over. And then people that didn't come over to the house to watch the fight, he began taking the tape to their house. My neighbor, a guy named Eric Marquardt, he wasn't home. My dad drove across the street and took him the tape and said, I gotta come inside. I got to show you something. He was so proud. He was so into this little slap fest fight. He took it to work and I ran into more people in that little orbit that had seen the fight because my dad made them watch it, which I got a lot of pride from. That made me feel good. I got a lot of pride that my dad was proud of that moment. And he was so mad at himself for staying home and sending my mom and I up to Washington to have this experience. So there you go.